waiting for the facts, we jump to conclusions. And that again drove this narrative. It drove this idea that Putin was this very dangerous figure who had to be stopped at all costs. And you saw magazine covers like Der Spiegel saying, "Stop Putin now." You saw basically him being presented as some kind of vampire. Someone showed me that even The Economist this month has Russia's Putin's war on the West. Now, Putin's view, of course, is sort of opposite. He thinks the West is at war with him. And when you have these two situations, it becomes sort of easier to understand how you get to nuclear war. Because you have two nuclear states. You have many people in Washington now talking very openly about arming the Ukrainian military. You have the Ukrainian military talking about attacking and fighting the Russians. And you have this support really across the American political spectrum. It's not just Tommy Friedman of the New York Times who's talking about this sort of thing. It's also Nicholas Kristof, who's considered kind of humanitarian, liberal. He did a piece last year about what the Ukrainians need from us are guns. And to take on the Russians, to go kill the Russian bear, as he put it. So now you have the situation growing increasingly dangerous. And the possibility becomes that there will be future miscalculations. There was, just a week ago, there was one of the senior officials of the Ukrainian government was speaking with Canada's CBC. And here's what he said. This is Ukrainian Deputy Foreign Minister Vadim Prystaiko. He told Canada's CBC that the Ukraine wants to have, quote, a full-scale war against Russia. Prystaiko explained, quote, everybody is afraid of fighting with the nuclear state. We are not anymore in Ukraine. However dangerous it sounds, he said, we have to stop Putin somehow. So when you get to that kind of passion and that kind of excessive language and that kind of dare the torpedoes approach, what you end up with is a situation where you could very easily slide into the next series of miscalculations and the next. And the Russians may feel that they are about to be attacked. And as Seth put it, I mean, if in those kinds of moments, it becomes more reasonable to expect you're going to be attacked. And so if you see a blip on the screen showing that maybe it's a nuclear bomb or a nuclear missile that's been fired at you, you're more likely to react. And vice versa. The Americans are going to be more tense about this because they know the Russians are feeling paranoid and are at risk. So what you encounter is that we create a situation where nuclear war is not something that is just an abstraction. It becomes something that could actually happen. What's been most distressing to me, I would say, about covering Washington during this period is that there's a cavalier, goofy quality to so much of what the journalists and the media are doing, and the politicians as well. Kind of a one-upsmanship. I can be more aggressive than you. If you say you want to do this with the Russians, I'm going to do this with the Russians. And there's almost a bidding of tough talk and tough guyism and some tough galism too. I mean, it was Hillary Clinton who was the first one to start comparing Putin to Hitler this time. So I guess the point I'm trying to make, and what I've been doing, what some of our work at Consortium News has been focused on in the last year or so, has been trying to write this story honestly, trying to tell it from both sides. It used to be a part of my profession that we believed, and sometimes it's not true, but we believed that there are always two sides of a story. And you're supposed to at least seek out the other side of the story and represent it fairly. Even if you don't like the people, you're supposed to represent it fairly. I used to cover death squads in Central America. I've interviewed Roberto Dobusan. I dealt with the Tonton Macoute in Haiti. I didn't like these people, but it was a case of always trying to hear what their side was and understand it. And that was the job, I thought, of a journalist, to present both sides of the story honestly. And by doing so, give the American people the chance to then reflect back onto their politicians with a full understanding of what's at stake. Not to be led, not to be corralled, not to be, the phrase that they like to use in Washington, perception management. The point of what the U.S. government's been doing for so long now has been sort of captured in that phrase, perception management. They feel that the job, especially after the Vietnam War, when the American people got kind of out of control, the idea of how do you bring them back into line with the policies of a more warlike position in the world, a more militaristic position. And so they set to work, and they set to work aggressively during the Reagan years. They brought in the CIA. Walter Raymond Jr. was the top propagandist at the agency. He was brought into the National Security Council. He set up interagency task force on how to, as they said, manage our perceptions. And they've done a pretty good job of it. And what's been also happening along those lines is that as the years have gone on, the American news media has increasingly fallen into line, increasingly become a force to project, to reflect that perception management strategy rather than to contest it, and not to provide the American people an objective, fair, honest, full accounting of what's going on, but to tell you what's necessary to get you to support what they want to do in the first place. And I have to say that one of the worst places for this, in this recent round anyway, has been the New York Times. The New York Times has been utterly disgraceful in how it has presented the Ukraine story. It is one-sided. You read these stories, they reek of bias. I could say the Washington Post has been no better. That's certainly true, but that's not saying much these days. The Washington Post has become essentially a neoconservative newspaper and promotes neoconservative views. And the New York Times has increasingly moved that way too. And I kind of understand it as a journalist, that you're always looking out for your career. You don't want to be out of step. You want to make sure you get that promotion. You don't get fired. You don't get put on the overnight desk, whatever they can do to us. So you play ball. But playing ball in a case like this, especially, it's bad enough to do it on Iraq or on Panama or on Grenada or on Nicaragua or some other sad country. But to do it now on the border of nuclear-armed Russia and to not understand the dangers that you're putting the world into and the American people into, it seems at some point your career is not that important. Anyway, I do want to thank you and thank Helen for this opportunity.
Thank you much, Robert. As you spoke at the end, I was reminded of Goebbels. Every time Hitler invaded another country, what Goebbels did was take over all the media and the women's magazines. So that's what's kind of going on now, isn't it? Now, so we're proceeding into Q&A. So if you've got questions, please pass them to the people in the aisles. Well, really, Robert, you've answered this question. Do you think reporters or editors are responsible for one-sided reporting about the Ukrainian situation?
Well, obviously, yes, I do. I think what we've seen, and I must say, in my 37 years covering Washington, I have never seen anything quite like this. I have seen groupthinks, I have seen conventional wisdom, I have seen people in Washington go off completely half-cocked in the wrong direction. I have never seen something almost totalitarian like this, where there is an across the board, from essentially right to left and center, a way of presenting this story to the American people, which I'm not saying it's entirely wrong, but it is certainly highly one-sided, and it has not given the American people the kind of balance that they need to understand this very serious crisis.
But the question was, are reporters doing this on their own?
Oh.
Or are they getting strong management dictations?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I didn't understand that part of it. Well, the way it works, and I've been there, I've been in these situations, rarely do you get the strict orders to do a story a certain way, but you certainly know which way your editor or your publisher wants to go with it. And you know that if you go against that grain, you do so at your own career risk. And even if you do your job very, very well, maybe if you do it very, very well, it makes you even more vulnerable. You become a target, and you become a target of not just your competitors in the business, but also your editors might not want to back you. Your publisher, your bureau chief, whoever's in charge of you, will make it clear that you're not wanted, that you are that you're not someone that they think they want to have as part of your group, their organization. And so it's a mix of things. And at the level I was at as a correspondent, reporter, you often don't get it as directly as I'm sure my superiors got it from people in charge. But I would say there was this great myth about the liberal media that existed throughout much of my time in Washington, and there's no really such thing as a liberal media. It was run by people who tended to be fairly conservative, or at least, very much pro-establishment, let's say. And so those people would pass on what they wanted. When I was at the Associated Press, the guy running AP was named Keith Fuller. He was very conservative. He was a big supporter of Ronald Reagan. He gave speeches even about how Reagan's victory in 1980 was a major turning point for America, and how it was a time, as he put it, when he went through a whole series of terrible things that had been happening in America, and he said, we don't want to have the union of, we want the union of Adam and Eve, not the union of Adam and Bruce, was one of the things he was upset about at the time. So that sort of reflects the kind of thinking that you often found from the higher ups. And when I went to Newsweek, it was even worse. Newsweek was very much pro State Department. They made it very hard on their correspondents who were in the field reporting back honestly about things. They often fired them or removed them, sent in people who would report things the way the embassies wanted in the field. So that's how it came down.
I'd like to add something about the media here.